Get ready for scars that time cannot erase. Some tragedies are so heartbreaking that they etch an unerasable scar on the soul of humanity.
A 18-year-old girl, and they say, was kept in such isolation by her parents that she never even learned to talk. The girl still wore diapers and was uttering infantile noises when a social worker discovered the case 2 weeks ago.
Jeannie Wiley, born in 1969, endured a life of extreme isolation and abuse at the hands of her father. From the age of 20 months, she was locked in a room, strapped to a child's toilet, and deprived of normal human interaction. For 13 years, she was denied language, socialization, and basic care. When discovered in 1970, her severe developmental delays shocked the world. Researchers exploited her case, using her as a subject in cruel experiments on language development. Despite being freed from her father's grasp, Jeannie's emotional and mental scars ran deep. She struggled with relationships and language, forever haunted by the trauma of her early years. Her story remains a devastating reminder of the long-term consequences of neglect and abuse. On Christmas Eve, in the year 1945, the Sodder family's home in West Virginia was consumed by flames. 5 of the family's children, Betty, Sylvia, John, Maurice, and Jennifer, were never seen again. The fire was devastating, but inexplicably, no remains were found, despite the fire's intensity. George and Jenny Sodder believed their children had been kidnapped and did not perish in the blaze. They spent years searching for any trace, following countless leads, but their quest for answers remained fruitless. The case baffled authorities and haunted the family, who refused to believe their children were gone. The fire remains a tragedy shrouded in mystery, unanswered for decades. The unsolved case left the Sodder family broken, unable to accept the loss or find closure. They kept hope alive, always searching for signs that their children were still alive, waiting for a miracle that never came. The case of the missing Sodder children remains one of the most enduring mysteries in American history. As the mystery of the Sodder children unfolded, another tragic story was unfolding far away in Colorado. The sudden disappearance of 3 children in Australia, an unsolved case that has haunted families for decades. On the morning of January 7, 1966, 3 siblings, Jane, Arna, and Grant Beaumont, vanished without a trace while on a family outing to Glenelg Beach in South Australia. Jane, the eldest at 9 years old, Arna, age 7, and Grant, just 4, had been given permission to walk along the beach alone, a routine that was considered safe at the time. But when their mother returned to the beach to gather them, they were gone, leaving only an empty stretch of sand behind. Despite an extensive search effort involving the police, volunteers, and even the military, no evidence was ever found to explain the disappearance of the Beaumont children. The case became one of Australia's most high-profile mysteries. Investigators worked tirelessly, following leads and interviewing countless witnesses, but the trail eventually ran cold. The fate of the Beaumont children remains unknown to this day, and their disappearance continues to haunt families and law enforcement alike. For the Beaumont family, the pain of losing their children was compounded by the lack of answers. The community rallied together, offering support, but there was little solace in the face of such an overwhelming mystery. The case became a source of national sorrow as parents across the country feared that their own children could disappear just as suddenly. Over the years, various theories emerged, ranging from abduction to the possibility of the children having wandered off and met a tragic fate. But with no bodies found and no suspects identified, the case remains unsolved. The disappearance of the Beaumont children became an enduring symbol of the vulnerability of children and the terrifying unknowns that parents face. It sparked significant changes in child safety laws and became a turning point in how children were monitored in public spaces. The investigation into the disappearance was never fully closed, and every new lead or potential clue brought with it a mixture of hope and heartbreak. As the years went on, the story of the Beaumont children became one of Australia's most heartbreaking and mysterious tragedies. For the family, every anniversary of their disappearance was a painful reminder that they may never have closure. The loss of 3 young lives without explanation or justice left a permanent scar on the nation, and for the rest of the world, it became a cautionary tale about the unpredictable and terrifying reality of a child's disappearance. On December 14th in the year 1996, 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey was found murdered in the basement of her family's home in Boulder, Colorado. Her death shocked the nation, and despite an intense investigation, the identity of her killer has never been determined. JonBenet had been strangled, and her parents, John and Patsy Ramsey, were thrust into the spotlight, both as suspects and as victims of a horrific crime. The media circus surrounding the case only deepened the family's pain. Years of speculation, wild theories, and relentless media attention followed the tragedy. The unresolved questions surrounding JonBenet's death haunted her family for the rest of their lives. The grief they experienced was compounded by the public's unyielding scrutiny. As of today, the case remains unsolved, and JonBenet's tragic death continues to captivate the world. Her family's struggle to understand what happened has become a symbol of the pain and suffering that often accompanies unsolved crimes. Another devastating tragedy unfolded in Connecticut. On December 14, 2012, a small town in Connecticut was forever scarred by an unimaginable tragedy. Sandy Hook Elementary School, a place that was meant to be safe for children, became the site of one of the deadliest school shootings in American history. A 20-year-old gunman, armed with assault weapons, entered the school and opened fire. He took the lives of 26 people, including 20 children, all aged 6 and 7. Among the victims was Dylan Hockley, a boy full of life, whose innocent dreams and love for sports were abruptly shattered. Dylan had been in class when the gunfire erupted, and his life, like those of his classmates, was stolen in a split second. His parents, devastated by his loss, struggled to comprehend how a place so filled with laughter could turn into a scene of such horror. Dylan's mother, a teacher at the same school, never returned home that day, leaving a family in shock, trapped in the darkness of a grief that could never be undone. Sandy Hook was meant to be a nurturing environment for these children, a place where they learned and played. Instead, it became a reminder of how fragile life can be. The horror of that day sent shockwaves throughout the nation as survivors and the families of victims were forced to confront the aftermath. The questions about how and why this could happen plagued the nation. How could such violence be inflicted on children who were innocent and just beginning their lives? For those who survived, the haunting images of the shooting stayed with them, etched in their minds forever. Sandy Hook was not just a tragedy for the community of Newtown, but for the entire world. It brought attention to the urgent need for gun control and mental health reform, but the scars it left on those directly affected were far deeper than any debate. In the years that followed, Sandy Hook became a symbol of the devastating consequences of gun violence in America. Dylan's parents, along with others who lost children that day, channeled their pain into activism, demanding change to protect future generations. The loss was immense, but their fight for a better, safer world continued. For Dylan's parents, every year that passed only deepened the void left by his absence. Yet the memory of his bright smile and his love for life kept them moving forward, advocating for those who no longer had a voice. The tragedy of Sandy Hook never fully healed, but it ignited a movement that continues to resonate today. The loss of 20 children and 6 dedicated educators would remain in the hearts of the survivors and their families, a painful reminder of how quickly the joy of childhood could be taken away. The story of Sandy Hook is not just about loss. It's about the ongoing struggle to ensure that no other child ever has to face the terror that unfolded that fateful day. From the horrors of Sandy Hook, another voice would rise in the rubble of war, where the children of Aleppo faced unimaginable destruction. As the Syrian civil war ravaged the country, the city of Aleppo became one of its most infamous battlegrounds. In the year 2016, the city was completely besieged by forces loyal to the Syrian government. Thousands of civilians, including children, were trapped in the crossfire of this brutal conflict. Among those children was 7-year-old Bana Alabed, whose brave voice resonated around the world. Bana, living with her family in Aleppo, became a symbol of the suffering endured by children caught in the chaos of war. Bana's haunting tweets about her life under siege began in the fall of 2016 as the world watched her share first-hand accounts of the violence surrounding her. "Please help us. The bombs are killing us," she tweeted. In the midst of unimaginable destruction, Bana's words pierced through the noise of the war, offering a glimpse of the humanity that still existed amidst the rubble. Despite being only a child, her words carried the weight of an entire generation's suffering. Her small family lived in constant fear. The sounds of artillery, explosions, and airstrikes became a part of daily life. The very air they breathed was filled with dust and the stench of death as buildings collapsed around them. Bana, like many other children in Aleppo, was forced to grow up in a world of constant danger and uncertainty. Schools, playgrounds, and hospitals were destroyed, leaving no place for children to feel safe. The once vibrant city, known for its culture and history, was reduced to a pile of rubble, leaving families like Bana's with nothing but memories of a life they would never get back. Though Bana and her family were eventually able to leave Aleppo and escape the violence, her voice continued to echo in the hearts of those who followed her story. Her brave tweets caught the attention of the world, but as time passed, the focus shifted away from Syria, and the world's attention faded. Still, the scars left on the children of Aleppo remain. Their lives were forever changed by the war, and many were left with deep emotional wounds that no one could heal. Families, like Bana's, were torn apart by the violence, and children were robbed of their childhoods. Bana's story was a reminder of the horrors that children face in war zones where their lives are often sacrificed in the name of political power. The innocence of a child can be stripped away in an instant, leaving them to grow up in a world of death and destruction. For every Bana, there were countless other children whose stories went untold. As Syria continued to suffer, so did its children, whose futures were ripped away from them by a war they did not start and could not escape. In the aftermath, the world watched as millions of Syrians fled their homes, searching for safety and a chance to rebuild their lives. But for the children of Aleppo and Syria, the effects of the war would be felt for generations to come. Bana's voice might have gone silent, but the pain of the children who lived through that hell continues to speak to the world. As Aleppo's rubble was still fresh in the minds of many, a fire in Russia would claim the lives of children whose futures were stolen in the blink of an eye. This is the photo a few minutes back of the fire. On March 25, 2018, a fire broke out in the Zimnyaya Vishnya shopping mall in Kemerovo, Russia. The blaze, which started in the entertainment area of the mall, rapidly spread, trapping visitors inside. Among the victims were children, many of whom had come to the mall with their families to enjoy a day of shopping and leisure. One of the victims was 8-year-old Irina Kuznetsova, who had been spending time at the mall with her mother when the fire engulfed the building. Irina's mother, who survived the fire, was left to carry the heavy burden of grief. Her daughter, along with many others, was trapped in the chaos as the fire spread quickly, and the mall's fire safety system failed to operate properly. Many of the exits were blocked, and the building had been poorly maintained, leaving people with no way to escape. As the smoke filled the air and flames roared around them, the chances of survival became slimmer by the minute. Irina, along with dozens of others, perished that day, leaving families heartbroken and furious at the preventable nature of the tragedy. The aftermath of the fire revealed widespread negligence. Investigations uncovered that the mall's management had ignored basic fire safety protocols, and the authorities had failed to ensure the safety of the public. For the families who lost children, including Irina's, the pain was compounded by the fact that this tragedy was avoidable. The public outcry was swift, and protests erupted as citizens demanded justice for the victims. But for those who had lost their children, no amount of justice could bring back their little ones. In the wake of the fire, Kemerovo was left to mourn. The city, known for its industrial roots, became a place of sorrow and disbelief. The memories of the children who had died that day haunted every corner of the community. Families gathered to remember their lost children, and the cries of the parents who had lost everything filled the air. The tragedy, though rooted in neglect, became a stark reminder of the importance of safety regulations and the need to protect the most vulnerable members of society, our children. In the years that followed, the Kemerovo tragedy became a catalyst for change, as the Russian government was pressured to strengthen safety regulations in malls and other public spaces. But for those who lost children, the void in their hearts would never be filled. Irina's name would live on in the memories of those who loved her, a symbol of a life lost too soon. Drugs, which took many lives. In the early 1960s, a pharmaceutical drug named thalidomide was introduced as a safe treatment for pregnant women, meant to alleviate morning sickness and help with sleep disorders. The drug was marketed widely and became popular in many countries, including Germany, the UK, and Canada. Unfortunately, it soon became clear that thalidomide was far from the miracle drug it was thought to be. It was discovered that thalidomide was a powerful teratogen, a substance capable of causing severe birth defects. Thousands of children around the world were born with missing limbs, malformed organs, and other debilitating conditions because their mothers had used the drug during pregnancy. The horror of these birth defects was not fully understood until years after the drug had been released. Among the affected children was a little girl named Susan, born in the United Kingdom. She was born without arms, like many others whose mothers had taken thalidomide. Her birth, and the countless others like hers, changed the lives of families forever. Susan's mother had no idea that the drug, which was supposed to ease the discomfort of pregnancy, was instead causing irreversible damage to her child. Many mothers, like Susan's, had trusted the medical system and the promises made by pharmaceutical companies. They never expected that their innocent babies would be born with missing limbs or serious health complications. As children like Susan grew, their struggles intensified. They had to learn to navigate a world that was not built for them. Simple tasks like writing, dressing, or eating were made nearly impossible. They were forced to adapt in ways that few people could imagine, using their mouths or feet to do tasks that others did with their hands. While some thrived, many others faced endless obstacles and prejudices in a society that was not prepared to accommodate them. The thalidomide scandal led to significant changes in the way drugs were tested and approved. It prompted global discussions about the safety of pharmaceuticals, particularly for pregnant women, and led to the creation of stricter regulatory processes. However, no amount of legislation or compensation could undo the damage caused by thalidomide. Many survivors struggled to find the support they needed and were left feeling betrayed by the companies and governments who had allowed such a dangerous drug to be distributed in the first place. For families like Susan's, the emotional pain was just as devastating as the physical challenges their children faced. The knowledge that their children's suffering was caused by a drug that was marketed as safe lingered like a dark cloud over their lives. And while the world moved on, the thalidomide tragedy remains a poignant reminder of the importance of thorough testing, responsibility in drug production, and the unthinkable consequence when that responsibility is neglected. As the world grappled with the lasting effects of thalidomide, a fire in a high-rise tower would later devastate London, claiming many innocent lives, including those of children, in a preventable tragedy. On the night of June 14, 2017, a fire broke out on the fourth floor of the Grenfell Tower in London. Within hours, the flames had spread across the entire building, consuming the high-rise and trapping hundreds of people inside. The tragedy resulted in the loss of 72 lives, many of them children and families. Grenfell Tower, home to hundreds of residents in a low-income area, was meant to be a place of shelter and security. But on that fateful night, it became a death trap. The fire began in the early hours of the morning, catching many residents off guard as they slept in their homes. The building, a block of social housing, had been fitted with flammable cladding as part of a renovation, which only fueled the fire. The emergency response was slow, and many of the building's fire safety systems, such as alarms and emergency exits, were either inadequate or non-functional. As the fire raged on, many children and families were trapped, unable to escape. Parents made desperate attempts to reach their children, but the smoke and flames made it impossible. Among the victims was a young girl named Jessica, who was only 11 years old when she perished in the fire. Jessica's mother, who managed to survive, was left devastated by the loss of her daughter. For many survivors, the trauma of that night would never leave them. The emotional toll of losing a child in such a horrifying and preventable way left an indelible mark on their lives. In the aftermath, the community rallied together to mourn the victims and demand justice. The Grenfell Tower fire became a symbol of the failure of government and local authorities to protect vulnerable populations. It exposed the dangers of neglecting building safety and the consequences of prioritizing cost-saving over human lives. The tragedy sparked outrage across the UK and beyond, with many calling for a full investigation into the causes of the fire and the lack of safety precautions. It also reignited debates about housing inequality and the poor living conditions faced by marginalized communities in major cities. For the families of the victims, the pain was compounded by the realization that the tragedy could have been avoided. As survivors fought for justice, they not only sought accountability, but also demanded changes to building regulations to ensure that no more lives would be lost due to negligence. Grenfell Tower, in all its horror, became a lasting reminder of the need for safety, justice, and the protection of those most vulnerable in society. As the mystery of the Beaumont children lingers in the minds of many, another unimaginable tragedy struck in Haiti, where a school collapse would claim the lives of over 200 children, forever changing the course of their families' lives. On the morning of February 24, 2005, the walls of the Elie Dubois School in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, collapsed during a heavy rainstorm. The building, which had been poorly constructed and lacked necessary reinforcement, could not withstand the strain of the weather. Tragically, the collapse killed over 200 children, many of whom were crushed under the debris as the school crumbled in seconds. On December 26, 2004, one of the deadliest natural disasters in history struck the coastlines of 14 countries, including Indonesia, Sri Lanka, India, and Thailand. A massive undersea earthquake triggered an enormous tsunami that swept across the Indian Ocean, claiming the lives of over 200,000 people, many of them children. In an instant, entire villages and towns were wiped out as towering waves crashed onto the shore, leaving nothing in their wake but destruction. Thousands of children, many on their way to school or playing by the beach, were caught in the disaster and lost their lives in a matter of minutes. In the hardest-hit areas, children were separated from their families as the waves tore through homes and schools, leaving only rubble behind. Many children were found orphaned, clinging to debris or swept away from their homes. The grief of parents searching for their children, only to find they were lost forever, was felt around the world. In the aftermath of the tsunami, entire generations of children were left without parents, homes, or communities, and their futures were stolen in an instant. The destruction was beyond comprehension as the tsunami affected millions of lives, leaving many children traumatized and without the support of their families. Relief efforts quickly began, with countries and organizations from around the world providing aid, food, and medical supplies to the survivors. However, for those who lost their children, no amount of help could heal the pain of losing young lives so suddenly and violently. The Indian Ocean tsunami serves as a painful reminder of how vulnerable children can be in the face of natural disasters, where forces beyond their control can tear apart their lives in an instant. The tragedy of so many young lives lost remains etched in the memory of those who witnessed it. And the world continues to honor their memory by supporting efforts to prepare and protect future generations from such devastating events. Another case of an unspeakable tragedy unfolded in the streets of the Philippines, where young lives were stolen away in a matter of hours. On November 23, 2009, in the province of Maguindanao, Philippines, a convoy of journalists and political supporters, including several children, was ambushed and brutally murdered. The attack, which claimed the lives of at least 58 people, including 18 women and 2 children, was one of the deadliest acts of violence in Philippine history. Among the victims were 2 young children who had been accompanying their parents as they traveled to a political rally. The children were caught in the middle of an unspeakable act of violence, where armed assailants showed no mercy, murdering the entire group without hesitation. The children who perished that day were not political figures or journalists. They were innocents, unaware of the deadly political conflict that had placed them in harm's way. These children's lives were violently taken, and their names became synonymous with the tragic loss of innocence in the midst of a politically charged war. The massacre was carried out by members of a powerful political clan, and the perpetrators showed a chilling disregard for human life. Families were left to mourn the senseless deaths of their children, whose only crime was being caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. In the aftermath, the massacre sparked outrage across the globe, and calls for justice rang out from the international community. The world demanded accountability, not just for the massacre, but also for the systemic corruption and political violence that had led to such brutality. For the families of the children who died that day, there would be no comfort. Their children had been victims of a society that failed to protect them, and the scars left by the massacre would never truly heal. The Maguindanao massacre remains a painful reminder of the lengths to which corruption and political power can go when human lives are expendable. For the children who died in the massacre, their futures were stolen from them before they even had a chance to grow. As the Philippines continued to reckon with the aftermath of that dark day, the world witnessed another horrific tragedy. On April 14, 2014, 276 schoolgirls were abducted by the militant group Boko Haram from their secondary school in Chibok, Nigeria. The world was shocked as news of the mass kidnapping spread, revealing the brutal and heartless actions of the armed group. The girls, many as young as 12, were taken in the dead of night, their lives forever altered by a single horrifying act. They were taken to remote areas, forced into marriage with militants, and subjected to horrific violence. The abductions were not just an isolated incident, but part of a larger campaign of terror carried out by Boko Haram, who sought to rid the region of education for girls, among other extremist goals. As the world cried out for their safe return, it was clear that these young girls were not just victims of kidnapping, they were victims of a war that sought to suppress their rights to an education and a life of safety and opportunity. The families of the Chibok girls were thrust into a nightmare from which they may never awaken. Some parents waited years, hoping that their daughters would return to them. Others, in the face of overwhelming grief, were left to wonder if their children were still alive as they heard of girls being sold into slavery or forced into marriages with their captors. The abduction marked one of the darkest chapters in Nigeria's modern history and underscored the devastating reality of terrorism and violence faced by children in conflict zones. The abduction of the Chibok girls sparked international outrage, leading to the #BringBackOurGirls movement, which called for action and demanded that world leaders intervene to ensure the girls' safe return. But despite some being freed in later years, many remain missing to this day, their fates unknown. The trauma endured by the girls who were released, as well as by those still in captivity, is unfathomable. For these children, the scars of this tragic event will last a lifetime, and their story serves as a reminder of the atrocities faced by children caught in the crossfire of violent conflicts. Let's move to the Black Day of December. On December 16, 2014, a terrible tragedy happened in Peshawar, Pakistan. Armed militants from the Pakistani Taliban entered the Army Public School and began shooting students and teachers. They killed 144 people, including 122 children. These children, most between the ages of 10 and 16, were just attending school when they were attacked. The militants went from classroom to classroom, shooting anyone they saw, causing fear and panic everywhere. Teachers who tried to protect the students also lost their lives. The attack lasted for hours, leaving the whole country in shock and grief. Parents waited anxiously for news, fearing the worst. The children were innocent, and their only fault was being at school. The attack was a heartbreaking reminder of how vulnerable children are in places affected by violence and terrorism. It also showed how cruel people can be, taking young lives without mercy. After the attack, the people of Pakistan came together to mourn the loss and vowed to stop such violence. Schools across the country tightened security, and the government promised to do more to protect children. The families who lost their children on that day will always carry the pain of their loss. The memory of those children is a reminder of how important it is to protect young lives in every part of the world. The world remembered the children lost that day, and the need to protect the innocent became more urgent than ever. A tsunami that took many innocent lives. Have a look. On March 11th, in the year 2011, Japan faced one of its most devastating natural disasters. The Tohoku earthquake, registering as one of the most powerful ever recorded, unleashed a tsunami that decimated entire communities along Japan's northeastern coastline. Among the victims was 10-year-old Aiko Matsumura, whose life was tragically taken by the monstrous waves. Aiko was playing outside when the tsunami's wrath suddenly arrived, and her world was torn apart. The waves swept her, along with her family and countless others, into the ocean. In the aftermath, Aiko's body was never recovered, and her family was left to mourn without closure. The devastation from the tsunami was beyond comprehension, as entire towns were flattened and hundreds of thousands were left homeless. With each passing day, survivors found themselves battling not only the physical loss, but also the emotional toll of the lives destroyed in moments. Despite Japan's efforts to rebuild, the scars left by that day remained. The tragedy was one of unimaginable proportions, changing the lives of everyone affected. As rescue efforts continued, the world looked on in shock, knowing that nothing would ever be the same for the people of Tohoku.